Good afternoon, everybody. Can everyone hear me? Is anyone awake? Thank you so much for being here this afternoon for what I'm sure is going to be a really interesting panel. How many of you are new to the Woods Hole Film Festival and here for the first time? Oh, thank you so much. My name is Judy Laster. I'm the director of the festival. I'll tell you a little bit about it, then I'll introduce the panel. We're going to see the promos of their films, and then we're going to get into it. And it's going to be a very interesting, dynamic conversation. And if not, then we'll open it up for questions. So a little bit about the Woods Hole Film Festival. This is our 34th edition. We started out 34 years ago as a one-day, one-hour event. We screened the films right next door at the old Woods Hole Fire Station. 5 short films, 1 hour, 1 day, fully subscribed festival. People loved it. Each of the people whose films we screened are making films today in the independent space, which is kind of amazing. When we started the Woods Hole Film Festival, we never could really imagine what the future was going to bring, but we decided that we were starting it, and the we is me and Kate Davis, who is also a documentary filmmaker from Woods Hole. We decided that we wanted to start the East Coast version of Sundance. And although we may have been tongue-in-cheek, we were actually not. Because we felt like what Sundance was when it first started, bringing people together to create community around independent film, was something that was perfectly aligned for Woods Hole. For those of you who may not know much about Woods Hole, it's a village that in the summer becomes this vibrant hub of creativity around science, around the water, around the arts, around so many great things, and people come here from all over the world. And so we felt like independent film has a place in this space, and over the past 34 years, what we thought back then has proven correct. And this year, I will say without a doubt, has reinforced and reinvigorated our feeling that what we're doing is the right thing to do, because this year we have 115 films that we selected from 1,000 submissions that we received from around the world. And we try and put together a program that we think represents the best in emerging independent film. We have 47 feature-length films, the rest are shorts, and we have over 100 filmmakers who have come here throughout the week to be part of this. But in addition to the films, we have master classes, workshops, music, parties, but the biggest thing I can say that we do is create community. And it's community around storytelling, it's community around ideas, it's community around being able to get together in a room and have a shared experience. So thank you for being part of this. This particular space is the Woods Hole Community Hall. It's a very old building. If you need to leave for whatever reason during the discussion, the exit is in the back. The restrooms are down the stairs. There is an elevator here if anybody needs one. And we're going to chat for a little while. Oh, please turn off your cell phones. We're going to chat for a little while, and then we'll open it up for some questions. And so we're going to get started. So to my immediate left, Bill Haney. Bill is a filmmaker who's made, well, he's not really emerging, so we might have to kick him out of the festival. But he's made 19 films. The film that we're screening tonight, Cracking the Code, the Phil Sharp story, is a unique Woods Hole, well, all these films are a unique Woods Hole Film Festival experience in that 400 people are coming to see a film about RNA splicing. So so Bill is here, and then Rosanna Shaw. Rosanna is first and foremost a writer for the LA Times who became involved with this story. It took over her life, and then she became a filmmaker. And so she has made one of the most sought after films in terms of people wanting to talk about the topic, Out of Plain Sight. And it's the kind of film where I'm sure she never set out when she was thinking about the story for the LA Times to make a feature documentary, but she did. And then, thank you so much. And then Natalie Zimmerman, you've been here before, right?
Not for the festival.
Not for the festival.
But I visited.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Natalie is a filmmaker in her own right. She made a film that we screened 2 days ago.
Sunday evening.
Sunday? The days get confused here. Oceania, and it's this beautiful film that really represents, I think, one of the most important issues that not enough people are talking about, which is, you know, we're all going to experience climate change, we're all going to experience change of every kind, whether we want to or not, but some people are currently in the front lines of it, and her film is really a beautiful film around how a certain group of people are adapting to that change. So we're gonna show the trailers for each of these films, and then we'll get started with questions. 3 amazing films by 3 amazing filmmakers. Although they are all under the umbrella of science filmmaking, they're all very different. So we'll start with each of you just telling a little bit of background about the film, how you came to it. For those people in the audience who may not have seen your films yet, just a brief description of the film. Why don't we start with Natalie, if that's okay?
Sure. I heard about this place through a friend who was holding a resiliency conference for presidents from low-lying islands that were threatened with, can you turn, with louder? Yeah. Okay. I heard about this place first from a friend who hosted a resiliency conference, presidents from low-lying islands, and it was a place I never heard of. And the president of Nota Tong, when they were in a circle, when asked to speak, he wept. And that really stayed with me, and she said that everyone was beyond words, and they all wept. And it made me think about this existential crisis that we're faced with as humanity. I was coming out, I'm a trained artist, and I was doing this residency on the social imaginary as a beginning point to create real change. And so these 2 ideas sort of came together. I was teaching at Cal at the time, and I wrote a grant, and I went in 2013. What I heard of the place was a lot of sensational headlines, but I really was wanting to know how this prediction was sitting with the people and their consciousness and their sense of home and who they were being predicted to be completely erased. And so that began this journey, and my collaborator and I developed this film over 12 years of conversations, and it's more creative nonfiction and almost hybrid in its approach, so it's a bit different. And yeah, it was a journey, so that's the title.
Yeah, thank you. It's truly an honor to be.
Can you all hear?
Not so good.
Okay.
How about now? Whoa, okay. It's truly an honor to be here with both of you and also Judy. Thank you so much. So I'm an environmental reporter for the Los Angeles Times. I consider myself a old young person and pretty old school, and you know I cover coastal and ocean issues for the Times. And you know, a couple years ago, I got this really eerie tip, that image of the barrel, from Professor Dave Valentine at UC Santa Barbara. He was on a research expedition with the amazing people at WHOI here, and they were on a completely different research expedition studying the seafloor, and just came across these barrels just off the coast of Los Angeles. And they were like, oh my God, what are those? What's inside them, and how many more are there out there? And Dave ended up calling me after a number of other people did not call him back, the EPA, NOAA, you know, any agency in the government who should have something to say about this. Got the runaround, called the LA Times, and you know, from there it was just peeling back, you know, this chapter of history that I didn't know if it was a secret chapter of history or a forgotten chapter of history. And I ended up finding shipping logs from the 40s and 50s documenting every single barrel that got dumped into the ocean. We added it up, as many as 500,000 barrels of DDT waste was dumped into the ocean just off the coast of LA, because the largest manufacturer of DDT was actually based right here in Los Angeles. And you know, we have such an interest, and we'll talk about this, the narrative of California, coastal California, our image of California is not necessarily tied to the industrial history of Los Angeles and the industrial histories of so many of our coastal communities. And so I published that first article. It went viral. Senator Dianne Feinstein at the time, you know, her staff told me that she threw the article down on the table on Monday morning. She's like, we have to do something about this. Kicked the EPA into action, triggered a bunch of, you know, really remarkable investigations, and, you know, mobilized an entire science community to study all the different parts of the ocean as it pertains to this one chemical and this one piece of history that we had just collectively moved on from. And, you know, the article prompted a lot of follow-ups. I was continuing to write about this issue as a drumbeat, projects, enterprise, environmental reporter. I got overwhelmed by the number of filmmakers who wanted to turn that article into a movie. And usually what happens when a film team wants to turn a journalism article into a story, and I'm overgeneralizing here, but generally it's like you reach out to the journalist in the newsroom, we hand the story off to the film team. They go make the movie. The journalist is sometimes kept on as an executive producer or a producer if they need a little bit more work. Sometimes the reporter is brought back to do a master interview at the end to help connect some of the narrative dots. And the language of that kind of film didn't work for the story because so much was still actively unfolding. So we ended up teaming up with an incredible indie film team, and our composer, James Ellington's actually in the audience with us. We had a really great, nimble, small core team that kind of started to work with me in the field. And their ask wasn't, can we make a movie with you? It was, can we follow you in the field? We didn't know if it was going to be a short film. We didn't know if it was going to be a feature. We didn't know if it was going to be a nothing burger. And just by having the trust of the scientists to allow us, just 3 people, sometimes 4 people in the field, follow them as they're asking these questions with answers that they didn't have yet, we ended up finding we made a film that brings the audience along with my journey as we're peeling back all of these layers. And there are a lot of plot twists in the film. It still gives me chills every time watching people watch it because the gasps are real, because I'm also discovering it in the moment. And I think what's really powerful as we've been bringing this film to film festivals is realizing just how much people have connected with the fact that this film isn't just presenting the result of journalism or the end product of a science paper. It's bringing you into the process of science and the process of journalism. And at a time when trust in the process has been so broken in this country, it's been really inspiring to see just how much people have realized, oh my God, the amount of rigor and repetitive dedication that goes into science and also for journalism. And we share kind of the desire to seek the truth, to unravel the truth, and to present the truth in a way that inspires more people to care. That's something that I found such commonality with the scientists. So I think what really is special about this film that I'm starting to realize is that it is not just a recap of my journalism or an adaptation of my journalism. It is my journalism presented in film form, and it is, science journalism at its heart.
Thank you. Bill?
I'm going to try this. Can you hear me, guys? Okay. Well, first of all, after that lengthy and passionate, thoughtful presentation, I want to just take a second. Thank you for doing this.
Yes.
I mean, it's been, I've known you for a long time. You've done an extraordinary thing for the state of Massachusetts, for independent storytellers, and of course, nestled here in Woods Hole as you are, celebrating science kind of almost in your daily life. It's so important that, that independent voices, emerging or not, and independent stories keep getting told. So can I just ask you guys to join me in a quick round of applause for Judy? So good on you.
Well, we couldn't do it without you.
The United States is in a complicated space right now. All of you know that. And things that are fundamental to being American are being questioned. You could see it coming, because of course we've had one round with this administration before, and the beginnings of a full-throated attack on science, which is woven into our society in a really cornerstone way, were obvious to the lightest observation. Science is at the center of the United States, even if you think about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the Declaration of Independence is drafted by 4 people. 2 of them are inventors. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson are quite celebrated inventors. And Ben Franklin, there was a study 20 years ago of the top physicists of the last 1,000 years. He's number 4 by physicists. He invented so much of what we think about today. The idea of creativity being filmmaking, copyright, and science was also central to the Constitution. There are a lot of rights to being an American that are not actually in the Constitution itself. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. These things are in the Bill of Rights that follow the Constitution 10 years later. But the Constitution itself celebrates the protection of intellectual property, copyright, and patent. So science and invention from that have been central to being an American since the very earliest days, and have been under fairly full-throated attack for the last decade, and increasingly now. Storytelling has an important part to play in thinking about this, and it affected why I decided to tell this story. This is, as Judy points out, the latest in a series of films that I've made, and always in a team. I love the idea made by, and then you see 3,000 names. So it's a collaborative process, and some of them, I'll just give you an example. I made a film where I lived part of 3 years with the poorest people in the hemisphere, who were being worked to death in the sugarcane plantations of the Dominican Republic under essentially modern-day slavery conditions. A Catholic priest who was fighting for their human rights, and the plantation owners who wanted to be completely done with him. You can probably guess who the good guy is. But those kind of conventional tropes, I don't think are really helpful right now in today's America, polarized as it is. And I frankly think the people who think differently, at least than I do, are better at bad news stories than the more progressive folks. So I was looking for stories that had two things to say. First, they would be celebrations, because I frankly think that the progressives are better at sunshine, and our antagonists are better at darkness. And second of all, something that linked inextricably but honorably to the American dream, and represented something that was really the American dream, an America that is a richer, more dynamic and positive force in the world, really even a noble force in the world. And it was linked to the affirmation of science, because you'll recall that phrase, "Make America Great Again," was always linked to things like go back to coal mining, and where the people who talk about that don't want their kids to be in a coal mine, and I don't want my kids or your kids to be there either, certainly not by obligation. So this story that celebrates an extraordinary guy who lives in the summers not very far from here, who was born in a one-room dirt floor house, no water, no power, in tobacco country, Kentucky, on D-Day, to parents who've never been to high school. And the boy is so severely dyslexic, he can't fully read today. His journey to winning the Nobel Prize for discovering centerpieces of human biology that will be cornerstone to building therapeutic drugs, including the COVID vaccine, on the one hand, and to sparking an industry that is not perfect, to be sure, but when he begins, helps no patients in the world. There are no biotech drugs approved. There are no jobs. Last year, there were 4.2 million jobs, and 7.6 billion people on Earth took a medicine created by the biotech industry. It's unconventional in independent film to celebrate something that even looks like a business. And science films, it's a rare thing. We opened this film at the Nobel Institute because there's essentially, I made one other film in this space, and there's never been any other film celebrating a Nobel Prize winner, scientist. So, at some stage, and I haven't had the privilege of seeing Natalie's work, which felt elegiac and luminous right there, but I have very kindly had a chance to see Rosanna's work, which celebrates the kind of process of science and the scientists, and reminds us how important that process is to teaching us how to live in a healthy and noble way. We're looking at a little bit differently. That's kind of the root stem of science as a creative act, the potential that it can bring joy to people, the opportunity for it to be a wellspring for the American dream, and a question about what the economy and world that America wants to live in, and how do we want to reach out to the world, with a medicine or with a cruise missile. And I think one final thing. In looking for things that all Americans, let me ask you this question. Put your hand up if you're pro-cancer. So for me, the search to find issues that all Americans could agree on, and then think about how to cooperate to solve big problems, as opposed to things where we fall in some form of division, where people can take advantage of that for their own ends. One of the great things about medicine is that we're all on the same side. Nobody in this room wouldn't like there to be a cure for Alzheimer's. And that lets us think about things differently, that we're all on the same side.
Lots to think about here. So, 3 very different films, 3 different filmmakers, but you all fall under the heading of science filmmaking, or maybe we just put you there. As a festival, we get asked all the time, well, what's different about the Woods Hole Film Festival, or what's your focus? And so we're forced to create a focus. Do you, as filmmakers, when you start your projects, think, oh, I'm going to make a science film, and what does that actually mean? And as we know, each of you has been working on your projects for a very long time. When you started making your films, you were probably thinking, you weren't thinking about necessarily what the end product was going to look like. But now that you've finished your film, and you finished it in a very different time than when you started it, you own the story, and now you are the storyteller for a film that you may not have expected to come out in the world that we're in. So can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a science filmmaker now for a project that you didn't really consider possibly when it came out, what the world was going to look like? What does that mean to you? Anyone? No one?
Go ahead,
Go
Natalie.
ahead.
I fear in this case I knew I was going to be a science filmmaker, in part because I think the intersection between, and in this case I admire it, the work that I've seen from Oceania, the intersection between filmmakers and a rich understanding of the sciences is a fairly small one. And so there's a real opportunity to tell stories that are surprising and hopeful in the world of sciences. And in this particular case, our socio-political time, unfortunately, you could see coming like a dump truck through the wall. So I wish I could tell you that I didn't expect the attack on science that I see today, but I did. And when I watch, this sort of elegant work done by Rosanna, on the one hand, I'm celebrating the scientists, on the other hand, I have a feeling of it's like watching the last of an endangered species, because I know what the attack on science means. And I fear our colleagues at the Woods Hole Institute, which is an oceanographic, and the Woods Hole Cancer Research Centers know it very well too. So I think linking to the daily life of our fellow citizens in the United States, and of course these are global stories, and will be seen in lots and lots of places, linking science in a way that allows folks to see that it's at the cornerstone of their well-being and their family's well-being is really important to sustaining enthusiasm for science generally. And finding ways to do that, ideally in a hopeful way, I think is important for all storytellers, including those who work in film.
Yeah, I would say I'm really excited for your film tonight, and sold out screening at Clap. That's really impressive. And I think the thing too, when I watched your trailer and read about your latest film, is that it's character driven. There's a story there, there's a compelling personality to follow and a journey. And also, I think access to science stories and access to science is a challenge for storytellers, and I could feel the level of access that you had that I think also makes your film super compelling. And I think to your question, I'm an environmental reporter. I get asked to talk a lot about science reporting and science journalism. I personally think that science cannot be talked about in a silo. Like, science is effective when the policy folks are brought into the room, when people who can benefit from the science are also engaged and activated, when the environmental nonprofits and the advocacy groups are also part of the conversation, when the indigenous communities are also braided into the way we talk about our relationship to the land and to the ocean. And so I think a lot of my work is constantly thinking about how to take a science story and make it a story that applies to everyone, and how to make sure that all the expert voices that are quoted in an article, in a film, are not just talking heads or science people, and then making science feel like it's super accessible to folks. And I think, I've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback from your team actually this week saying that they love the film because we didn't handhold the audience or didn't dumb things down for the audience. We trusted that the audience would follow us and find it fascinating, because science is fascinating, and science isn't just for a niche group of really smart, really geeky people. It's like really cool and really interesting and led by super passionate people who are also fathers. You know, Dave Valentine is the father of 3 daughters. Like, I think bringing out those elements of that, like, makes the story more universal. And I think when I watched your film on Sunday, I was just so moved by the poetry of kind of, and you really got to the soul of why science is important, why science matters, and why, you know, we need this universal truth and understanding to, like, help us move into the future, help us wrap our minds around what's at stake and what we're at stake at losing. So there, I think there's, and I really love that you brought the 3 of us together, because our films all speak, you know, to the same spirit, but our the approach is different, but I think our goals ultimately are the same in soul.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a science filmmaker, and I use film as a way to understand and stretch my mind around the world. So I approached this where I wanted to talk about their dreams around this idea of the social imaginary. And then it opened up worlds for me around, like, systems theory and cosmology. And I found this thing that I read, I don't know if you know the universe story that Brian Swim and Thomas Berry wrote. It really impressed upon me this idea that these eukaryotes and prokaryotes, these single cell forms, had to hold the memory of what worked as a community. So I feel like my film, I'm so grateful to be in dialogue and included in this, because I don't see myself as this, but I think we need cross-disciplinary conversations to happen for us to move forward. And certainly our consciousness, our sentience, and our spirit should be a part of that conversation, because that's what makes us human. And so I was inspired, and I actually got in to see your screening tonight. I have a ticket, and yours as well. You take us to the precipice, right? You uncover all of this, but the deeper question is, how did this happen? And I feel like for me, and this is part of science, right, is remembering. And so for me, my film is remembering these things and weaving them together, and yours is as well, because if we think of this place as our body, open-ended, we won't do what we did, you know, with the DDT, and we can move forward and love this place. And by virtue of doing that, we can move forward in a holistic, healthy, honoring way built on relationships, right? Relationships, and that's the positive piece of it, is like being relational. So, so thank you for the works that you do, and thank you for your visionary weave, because I don't see myself as that, but I feel like these kind of conversations are really, really important so that we understand each other.
We're going to talk a couple more questions among ourselves, and then we're going to open it up to you all as well. Is this on? So one of the things we talked about when we were preparing for this is, you know, you make a film, you start many years prior to the film coming out, and then sometimes a film comes out at a time that just happens to be the popular zeitgeist, and you never necessarily imagined that your film was going to come out at the right time, or at the time it does, that the world would have changed so much that your film takes on possibly a different intention than you ever set out to create. And then you're also the person who is associated with that film for a very long time, for the journey of that film. So can you talk about your personal experiences related to your current films in terms of owning the story, and then rethinking the film after it's come out, if the world has changed to meet your film and you never expected that to happen?
I guess we'll just continue in order. First of all, what a privilege listening to both of you. So thank you so much. And I've had this, experience of making films that are too early. I made a Black Lives Matter film 10 years before Black Lives Matter called American Violet.
That's good.
And I've watched films, including one that you kindly showed here, in different countries and different cultures, and people see them very differently. What is a civil rights issue in country A involving these issues, other people see as a metaphor for their own civil rights issues. So I think that where any form of craft goes is to some extent, and importantly, a dialogue between the viewer and the material, and we never know where that takes place. And the human heart changes, the culture changes, the society changes. And then there's the question of what kind of risks you're willing to take. So I've had death threats many times for making movies, making them and screening them. And in today's political environment, like we did a screening at the Senate, and
Of this film?
yeah, and the politics of today are very active, let me just say. And so, you can easily get maneuvered with your material. You got to be very clear what you want to say, what you can defend, and why you want to say it. Because, there are some very active polarizing forces in our society today. And science is itself, and so is storytelling. These are integrated forms of power. Communication is central to being human. And there's a very compelling biological argument that what separated Homo sapiens from Neanderthal was the power of narrative. So narrative can go beyond any confines that you imagine, cultural, creatively, politically. And that's why part of why it has such a great impact. I made a film called The Last Mountain sometime back that was it was about the fight for the last great mountain in Central Appalachia between the mining companies that wanted to blow it up for the coal inside and the locals who wanted to stop and build a wind farm. So it's a citizen democracy story at its subtext. You can probably guess again who the good guys are. And the coal industry was using at the time the equivalent of a Hiroshima bomb every week for a decade on the mountains of Appalachia. They had blown up 2,000 mountains. They had filled in 2,000 miles of river. There was a very clear bad guy who was extraordinarily powerful and had bought off 2 of the Supreme Court judges in West Virginia. And the politics of this were extraordinarily clear. Now, the science was the EPA coming in and saying these people are being poisoned, the drinking water is a tragedy, families are being imperiled. Screening those films, and we screened it in actually this case, Barbara Boxer was the senator from California at the time, very kindly invited my wife Maura and I to go and screen it at her house for 10 senators and congressmen. Wow. And they indicted the head of that coal company within 2 weeks. And they stopped the Hiroshima bombs. And I know this is going to be controversial, but just the facts, because life is complicated. One of the heroes in that movie is Bobby Kennedy, whose journey has taken him to some other places now. And he went to debate that guy. And the number of death threats, assassination attempts, or assassination suggestions were extraordinary because science and the facts can be controversial and provocative. So the journeys that we're on, and one of the things I haven't had the privilege, as I mentioned, of seeing your film, but I'm excited to see it. And Rosanna very kindly sent me her copy, and it's spectacular. And one of the things that I think that she did so artfully is that she manages to harmonize the particular and the universal extraordinarily well. And so while the particular is about a barrel or a series of barrels off Los Angeles, the universal is, of course, all of us and our relationship with forever chemicals and chemicals. And there's lots of people complicit in that story. And those people don't like stories that they're complicit in. So filmmaking is a political act with a small p or a big P, depending on the culture and the society at the time.
So I want you guys to both hop in here too, but also Rosanna, you have the other complexity of working for the LA Times as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I would say, the film had to be journalism. So, it was really fun working with the film team where, the rigor of the fact checking was even next level, and the way we kind of worked with the material and what rose to the LA Times standard of the film was sometimes different than the standard of regular film. But I would say, as the ocean coastal reporter for the LA Times, I'm constantly thinking about how we have such a land-centric way of thinking about our relationship to this planet. And I think, at the beginning, I knew that this was going to be a film that was hopefully going to get more people to care more deeply about the ocean and to think more deeply about our relationship to not just DDT, but every single chemical that we put into, the world, and thinking about and the reciprocity, right, of to each other and to the land and to the ocean. I think when the film came out, our film world premiered at Doc NYC a week after the election in November. I I think it really crystallized for me as we started to take it to film festivals that this was also a film that was the beginning of a conversation. I love that you have the way you've screened your films to people in power who could truly do something, even if they were so inspired, if there was that spark, and you are the spark. And I think realizing that, I never get to watch people read my LA Times articles. And I've heard, scientists in our film say, like, we put out a science paper in a journal and we can track how many people read it. And in both cases, there's similarities where we kind of put it out into the universe and expect people to read it and do something. It's not as much of a two-way exchange. Whereas with every film festival, I'm still, you asked about our personal experience. I made an early commitment to go to every festival that I can, to be there, to experience the film each time with the audience, because every audience is different, and be available afterwards for a Q&A, because this film, ultimately, my goal now is to have it be the beginning of a deeper conversation about, and to help people regain their trust in the science and in the journalism and to have that be interactive. I think we have become such a world where we all, retreat into our silos. We're talking online. That lack of in-person connectivity is something that, has really led us to, in some ways, where we are today and how polarized our country is. And film festivals, built-in community, built-in audience, like it's such a privilege and a joy to be able to be in conversation with all of you in person and to have these conversations. And I now feel an immense duty to continue doing that. And this film is such a great catalyst for a lot of those conversations. How many folks have seen the film already? Okay, amazing. Not to give it away, but there's, like, for the folks who haven't seen it, there's a moment in the film where we invite the audience to participate in something together, and it gives me chills every time when we get to that point in the film, because again, like, you can't replicate 200 people experiencing something together, experiencing a story together, connecting with the heroes that you see in the film, and taking a deep breath together, and then leaving that space changed in some ways, however small or big. And I think that's something that I truly feel like so connected to, and something that feels so special in the filmmaking process that I never really got as a journalist.
Wow, thank you, both of you, for those. I think for my film, Oceania, what has emerged, it's played a lot more outside of the country than inside the country. We're about to play Brazil, Rio. We started in Ecuador, we went through Europe, we're continuing. And one thing that I think is resonating is this sense of home and belonging, and at a time when we have so many migrant populations whose homes are threatened. And so that was something new that I didn't realize that it would resonate. I remember we had this screening and there were a lot of Ukrainian students in the audience, very, very emotional, responding. And I talked to the professor who brought me, and she said she was Ukrainian and they were Ukrainian. And so, it's beautiful when you can go on a journey and then bring something. And we actually wanted to release this a year prior, but it wasn't ready. And we didn't this was very much honorable harvest funding, I call it, where we got just what we needed. But I feel like there's some release of this film that was meant to come now, and now it's just playing on all these different shores I didn't imagine. And there were some Amazonian indigenous people that traveled 9 hours to come to Quito and see it, and that was maybe the most meaningful thing for me. They said, this is our story, And so I feel grateful that this community allowed me to share it with the world and trusted me. So that was something new. But what brought me there was the climate. But I think it's so much woven into the social and economics. Like you can't, and the human part of it, the human crisis, those things are connected. And so it's only 75 minutes, but I feel like she takes us on that journey, my character, Taquinas. And I feel like all of these stories, the different approaches, the different journeys, the research, the uncovering, the celebration of what we do well together collaboratively, like we need all of that, right, to move forward. So I'm so appreciative, again, of this weave that you've done with us. I'm Yeah, thank you.
Well, and for your film, people may not know really what's happening. I don't know if you want to sort of explain that a little bit more if people haven't seen the film, but Kiribati.
So it's a coral atoll, so it's a low-lying coral atoll, which is a trace of a volcanic island that's been subducted, but it's very low-lying. And so when you talk about the glaciers melting, which I saw a short on that, then they're threatened with sea level rise. But also a lot of other impacts because of contact, because they lost their traditional ways, and these things are sort of imposed, which exacerbate the problem and their ability to mitigate it. So I feel personally like they have a lot of wisdom. They're not just victims that need saved, but they have indigenous wisdom and a relationship with place that we could learn from and use. And so part of this story is showing that wisdom and how we can work together. A lot of my work in the making of this film was bringing the West and the indigenous ideas together to look at it more holistically.
And these folks might be relocated.
Potentially, and it's not that simple because they don't look at it like property, right? Like we do in the West, we can just get property, but to them they have a relationship with the landscape and are part of it. So it's kind of unthinkable. Their identity is woven to that place, and here's where understanding the indigenous set of values and how they relate to the world and planet is so important if we're going to talk about solutions. Like they need to have a seat at the table and truly be understood, I think, and that's what they want in terms of climate.
I think that I'm enjoying hearing you each describe these stories, and I think there's a couple of things that strike me. The first is that, of course, filmmaking is a communal craft. You know, by the way, I don't know which of you is the composer, but you did a damn good job, whoever you are. And because the music amplifies the story and enriches it and gives it resonance. And so does the attitude with which you are making the story. So when you describe the way you're thinking about it, there's so much respect in that I'm sure it comes across to the viewer. I can only just see the short. And I think that that's also really important, that there's a set, you know, we can talk about the story and the culture, and these are really important things to talk about. But then there's a set of values that are quietly imbue a film, you know, and there is something very different in watching it with an audience as a filmmaker and as an audience member than watching it at home by yourself. You can just tell by the body language of people. I do this in test screenings. I don't even have to ask anybody what they think. I can just sit in the back and I can tell what they think, unfortunately, sometimes. So you can feel the values of a festival. You can feel a festival that's a market and everybody's shuffling around trying to do a deal. You can feel it when there's a real value set in the festival programmers and the leadership of it, you know. And, you know, I think that, so part of what happens in the process of storytelling is not just the story itself, but the reflection of what it is we think is really important, you know, and, you know, for your film is not going to be well received by people who think the market is the moral leader of the universe and it should decide everything. And you're not probably saying that, but ultimately you're saying that. And, or that folks that think if you've got a PhD in finance from the Sorbonne, you matter, and if you're an indigenous person in Ecuador, you don't. And even though it's not saying that, it's of course saying that. Mm-hmm. And I think those are really important parts of, you know, we have a hero in our film that, and I get to ask you how many of you have seen it because I doubt any of you have seen it yet. You know, who reflects humility. Like you know, in today's culture in the United States, you could think that self-inflation, narcissism, and adulation almost is the most important value set because, you know, you look at the boaster in chief and you look at the people who are leading in industry in other places, and they all spend an awful lot of time self-promoting. But like the characters in your movie aren't self-promoting at all. Many of them are just doing the quiet work, and you guys are having a conversation. The facts are quite electrifying, but I think that that's an important piece to just figuring out, you know, who we as audience members want to be in our own individual values.
I really,
Go down the row one more time, and then we'll open it up for
also,
questions.
can I build on that just one briefly? I want to say, like, you know, I really connect with that because I think as like an environmental journalist and writer, and I can't stay filmmaker yet, but like I'm so cognizant of the fact that when we choose to quote someone in an article or choose to interview someone in a film or to center their stories, we're giving that person power and that story power and that perspective power. And I think that as storytellers, we have the opportunity to recalibrate and redistribute that power and to figure out who we want to, again, like center in these stories. And I think, Bill, like every time I hear you speak, I have this like moment of awe that like you've made so many films. You could literally make any film, and you are choosing as your 19th film to do another science film, and thank you for doing that. And I think choosing, again, where you direct, you know, where you take your focus and your lens and to put all of your energy and your passion and your skills into these stories, like you are also choosing which stories and which voices to give power to, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
So complex. You know, I just think that I went to those islands with an unconscious frame that was very Western Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment. And so I was asking questions that they were going around over and over. And what I had to do was unpack that internal frame that I went there kind of unconsciously with. And so a lot fell away that then I had to rebuild. You know, and a lot of people ask me after they see the film, it's very personal, how did you feel? And I felt a lot of grief because I'm part of this thing that impacted them and that was very real, and I kind of had to stop, but then rebuild from a place of hope that we can move forward, you know, if we feel this and recognize it. But I feel like now I'm extra conscious of that frame. And anytime I ask a question, there's this bias that once, you know, that we own. If we own that, then we can really sort of meet the other person, even if their frame is completely different, because they grew up completely different. But these people now, after 12 years, are like my family. And we understand one another more. And I think the world's better when we can meet each other that way. I don't have the answers that I'm there to give them and save them. And that's what they're used to. Like, you poor folks, I'm going to come and save you, and here's how I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I learned in the making of this. I didn't go with the answers, for sure.
Thank you. So much to talk about, but questions? Yes, and I'll repeat the question if people can't hear it.
Hi, thanks for making the movies. I've only seen one of them, but they're all sound really cool. I was just curious, so in science filmmaking, I understand you have to do a lot of research and a lot of reading complex topics that you might not have training in, or if you do, it might not be to the extent that you need to understand some of these complex topics. So how do you go about doing that kind of research and then making it digestible for a complete layperson? How is your sort of process on that, or just research in general?
That is a really good question. Which I'd really love to have one of my fellow panelists answer.
Did everyone
I was
hear
going to say,
the
you
question?
have the expertise. Jim's got,
Did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
So I think the question was, short bite, you know, when you make a film about science, you're making a film about something that you may not know as much about as the science involved. So how do you go about learning enough about it to make the film and then also to make it digestible? Is that right?
You know, the Enlightenment begins with the notion of inquiry, the scientific method that's sort of a centerpiece of Western thinking. And I understand, it's very interesting to hear how you think about unpacking our thinking. It's really interesting to think about. And it starts with asking questions, just genuinely asking. You know, what's really refreshing is how comfortable experts are in answering. And of course, the journey of a film is also a very personal journey for the filmmaker, as their own capacity to sort of serve as an intermediary between the audience and the material, you know, grows. And so part of the trick is to, to doing things with enough integrity and high quality to be accurate. And part of the trick is to making sure that the level of understanding that you begin to develop as a filmmaker, and certainly some of your interviewees have, doesn't make the subject unapproachable for your audience. One of the things that I find really helpful in doing that, I'll just say to you, example, I made a film previous to this one, and it was also in the world of science. As I said to you, my first 17 movies essentially aren't in science, although nature and the environment they were, so I guess it depends on how you look at it, but not in the hard sciences. My real intention in the last film was to inspire young people, especially young girls, who want to do creative, soulful work, but who kind of implicitly start to think science is a bit of a drudgery thing, and the kind of soulful, creative journey that scientists can have feels a little distant. And this is actually fact-based, this isn't just my opinion. And so I just started asking myself, who am I making this for? So that I can tone the information, not tone down to them, but make it available, not intimidating. And I think the combination of what your intention as a storyteller generally, but as a filmmaker here is, and the material, gets you to kind of find some harmony where you can, find interplay that works for everybody. And that does require an awful lot of times saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand, or could you say that in a simpler way that our audience will be able to comfortably follow? Because as an example, in our movie, there's 4 or 5 Nobel Prize winners, and when you ask them to tone it down a bit, they go from here to here. And so,
yeah, 2 quick things, and that's such a fantastic question. Thank you. One is just my job is to translate the science, and something that I actually tell a lot of science journalism students when I'm teaching is that don't go in over prepared, because once you start talking in their jargon and you know too much, you're not serving the reader anymore. So it's actually better to be the dumbest person in the room. And and I was really bad at science in school, and if I understand something, then you can bet that the reader will understand what I'm talking about. And so I think I go in kind of ready to, the deep listening is so important. And then another thing in my process that actually I didn't quite realize until we started filming is that I do this thing in interviews where I am talking to the scientist and I'm actually paraphrasing in live time, thinking about how I would write it in simpler English. And then I'll read it back. I'll say, I was like, so you're saying blah, 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 blah. And then that's actually what I am trying to write in my head. And then we capture that on film, and it's actually a good way of also re-indexing a really important point. And then the other thing I would just say is that I think the music and the sound design is so important in a film. I made this point after our screening, but if you just have an hour and a half of scientists talking and a journalist interviewing a scientist without music, not that it's a totally different vibe than having kind of music carry the different kind of pacing within a film, within a scene, and also allowing our composer truly got to the soul of what every single scientist is trying to say, and by expanding and triggering different parts of our brain to think about emotionally how we're processing and digesting this information. It was really powerful, and by having these creative sessions where we're okay, what are we actually trying to say here? What is the science? What is the mic drop moment? What is the delivery? And how do we do that with music, with sound design? And also the absence of music can be really powerful. And when we let the ocean speak, the number of times we tuned the soundscapes to the score and vice versa was also really powerful in the film. But I think recognizing that helping someone understand quote unquote science is not just focusing on their intellectual journey. It's also focusing on their emotional journey with the point or the story, and ultimately their philosophical journey. And how do we do that as storytellers with all of the skills in the room, our cinematographers, our composers, our sound designers.
Natalie, would you mind if I add one small thing to this?
No.
I think that expositional films, are from the neck up. It's like reading the white paper. Narrative films are designed to move you to. So part of the balance is to finding an equipoise between actually educating you with the research facts, but making it something you feel. And that's a lot about sound design. And that's a lot about spacing. It's like poetry where it's when the words come out, not where the words go in.
I think mine's a bit different, but I will speak to that a little bit because you know, it was important for me because we unpack the colonial history, we unpack the geological history, we go so far back, and I was wanting to make sure that we had that context for viewers, and I had that in the film, and I did a residency in Woodstock, and I got to work with Barbara Koppel, and she sat with me, she was my mentor, and she said, you don't need that. You need to let them speak their history in the way that they will. You don't have to put GDP in this film. And so she said, just try it. I said, how, Barbara? And she's like, how about if they sing it? You know, how would they do it? It's their story. And so it didn't quite happen like that, but I had someone write spoken word that was a musician, gave them the story of the history of how they landed on those islands. And then that was sort of like meeting halfway to make sure that you understood. But again, my story is very character driven and it's very emotional. And the language of my camera, because I shoot it, it's cinematically carried. So it's a bit different than what you're saying, but I did want to put in these things. But at the end of the day, you don't need them. I think you get them, you get that.
So we have time for 2 more questions. Right there. Sorry. Can you wait for the microphone? Thank you.
Hi, in your narrative films, you're talking about all these artistic elements, you know, the music, character-driven arcs, all of this. Do you think that this, because it's in the realm of art, that it has more power in changing politicians and the powers that be in making change in the world, real change that is not art-based, than straight journalism?
I guess I'll start. Thank you for that question. The first thing that popped into mind, so I before this movie, my last project was a book on sea level rise, and I remember the first day, I was driving into my first ever book talk, and I was listening to Naomi Klein, who is like an incredible journalist, talk about conspiracy theories on a podcast, and she said, conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but the emotions right, and that's why so much of it takes off. And I just, going into that book talk, and literally every book talk ever since, every film festival ever since, I'm thinking about the fact that people respond emotionally, and you know, I'll say like we focus so much on the facts, getting the facts right, doing the science translation, but like really attending to the emotional response of the person, and how do you guide someone accurately towards that direction emotionally is something that I have been really reflecting on as a storyteller beyond being a journalist who's just trying to translate the facts. And I remember my book editor telling me too, she was like, your first draft was too much show and not enough tell. And I'm like, what do you mean you're supposed to show, don't tell? But she was like, I need more telling that shows and meaning making out of the telling. And I think a lot of art, you know, does that, where you're showing things, but you're also delivering a deeper message emotionally for the person. And I've you know, the film has been powerful. Your films have truly activated change. And I think like, I feel like everyone left your screening on Sunday. Like, it was just like this collective, like we just went through a spiritual experience together. Like I truly felt that. And that's what art does, right? And I think, I don't want to speak for the scientists in our film, but I do also feel like the number of scientists who've been interviewed in our film, who've watched the film, you know, this week have said like, oh my God, this is even making me process my own science in a deeper, like I feel reinvigorated because of that. And I think, how do you inspire people? And yeah, I don't know if you want to.
I think it's, first of all, you know, actually, I have the great pleasure of being on a bunch of panels in lots of different parts of, you know, not just in my life as a filmmaker. And this is one I'm really learning a lot from both of you guys and from you, Judy, so thank you very much. The short answer is yes. Films matter disproportionately, in part because they're integration of so many different arts. You know, you see the director of photography, it's not the sound, it's not, the music is only part of sound design, important part to be sure, and composed music is only a part of music, depending on the film. We're affected by light, we're affected by color. You know, and the blessing of this in music especially, you know, I remember somebody once asking me after my first movie was the most important thing I learned, and I said, I learned that everybody talks about the picture and it's all about the sound. you know, and part of the reason it's all about the sound is that the sound touches us at a reptilian brainstem. It's like pre-communication in a way. And therefore it stays with us and it's emotionally powerful. And to some extent what we decide to do is what we feel first and then we rationalize second. And so, and that applies to, you know, policymakers. No, there's no question. You know, the reality, and I say this with trepidation about what it means, but I ask you to consider the most powerful figures in the United States. How much reading do you think they do? Okay. So, you know, we're different, but, you know, we know what it is. So, but, you know, an hour and a half film, especially one that moves you, especially if you have an emotional experience that varies throughout the course of it, I think that's a very different thing. And, you know, it's extraordinary and fantastic that Rosanna's article can compel Barbara Feinstein, not at the peak of her powers at the time we're talking about, to walk in and say, we got to change something. It's more common for that to be the case in the film. And I've had audiences be mad at me because I didn't give them something to do at the end of it. Like if you tell them a moving story and you don't leave them with, here's the thing you could do to take action, or certainly 10 years ago when you started, that was universal. Now, you know, people are getting so many texts and other things are starting to change, a little audiences are changing. Because this feeling is so compelling, you want to be able to act on it and not just be enraged or frustrated or concerned or scared or. So I do think that this blessed set of elements, especially in the, you know, and Freud talked about this, you know, in the dark room with other people, it's just a very different thing. It's not that it's a bad thing to watch it on your cell phone, you know, or to, of course, read it in a novel. Sometimes that can be great too, but it's a different thing.
Yeah, I think I've sat on a lot of panels around climate science and data because it's all been proven and out there. And always what comes up is you protect and care for what you love. And so if you don't love it, but you're just told, there's something missing there that prevents action because then your brain is filled with other distractions. And so I think you need all of it. You need the data after it, but first to reestablish our felt connection with this living place that I think is spiritual. And so my film is more focused on reestablishing that vis-a-vis this relationship and the journey that you go on. That's very sensuous in all the ways you're talking about, and yours as well, yeah. So thank you for that question.
One last question, Ellen?
I was just curious how.
Can you wait for the mic?
I was looking for him. I'm just curious, have any of your films been shown or will be shown like at universities or at schools or anything like that?
I have well, I'll say this very quickly. I have an impact campaign, and after the festival run, yes, we're going to be screening next year with Cal Films in the high schools, and I did do a special screening at Bard, which is where my son goes, and that was wonderful. But I think that's really important because you can have these cross-disciplinary conversations with students that have time to organize and question. So, yes, and more planned for me.
Thank you for that question. I am navigating distribution for the first time as well, and I have a massive, massive spreadsheet of every single professor who has asked me when I can play this film in universities. And the plan is to share it as soon as we figure out our distribution strategy. It's just that whole universe is so scary, and right now, my hope is that once we finish our film festival run, that we'll be able to take it to colleges and universities because there is just so much potential for just a deeper conversation with students in that way. Both journalism and environmental studies.
Yeah. The answer in this film is yes. We have done a series of screenings at major universities already, and I think we have 100 screenings between now and the end of the year planned, mostly at universities and science centers and the like. And the previous film, we built a teaching curriculum. And so I did a book that went with the film, which actually I think we're going to have here too, but we did a book that goes with this film that will be for anybody who comes by today. You'll get a copy if you wish. And we took the book and the film, and we built a teaching curriculum, and it's in 2,000 schools in the United States right now as part of inspiring. Remember I told you I was interested in how to help particularly young folks see a career in science, so we felt like it was really important to do that. And so I think that the real life is that, and I will say to you that, we did a screening, and we did a screening recently, and I was doing book signings afterwards, and it was it took a long time. And a third of the people who came up were crying. This may make you not want to come see the movie. They were mostly scientists who were feeling just, none of us are earning our living as a scientist, although I do, my primary job is not filmmaking, so I do primarily work with scientists. And they're under attack right now. They have very strong feelings about what they're going through. And you can imagine, perhaps you are a scientist yourself. Yeah, and so I do think there's also a part for young folks of giving them something, a vision where they could go that's really exciting for them. And I think there's a cathartic experience for people who are grieving, that sometimes films can do for an audience, and the audience can do for one another in that environment that's also very valuable. And I think a lot of that happens at the schools because that's a place of hope and potential and excitement, and it's before you become worn and grizzled like I am. And so I think you're wise to ask that question, and I'm sure that my friends on the panel will have a really rich personal experience screening it for students because it's just so alive, that environment.
Well, I want to thank everybody for
Thank
being
you.
here,
Thank
these
you.
incredible panelists.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
And also just want to say, we have this is Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We have lots of great films left. If you haven't gotten your tickets, you better hop on it. Things are selling out. But I think these guys would be probably willing to stick around in the back and have some brief conversations. We do have to get out of here at some point soon, but I just want to say this conversation I feel like could go on forever, and thank you for having it with us.
So nice to be with you, Judy.
Thank you.